Hey everybody, Joey here again, and I'm here for another installation of interviews with friends and musicians. And today I have with me Victor Rice, who's in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And you might know Victor Rice as a bassist, as a producer, composer, and dub master, mixer, audio engineer. And it's interesting because we've kind of paralleled each other when Victor lived in New York for years. During the 90s, we were kind of East Coast, West Coast counterparts of one another. People have been known to say about us because we're both.
That's flattering to say.
What's that?
I'm flattered to
well,
hear
me
you say
too. That. You know, I mean, really, it's great to be here with you. And, you know, our careers have run a lot of parallels. And most recently, we came together working for the first time together for a single that's dropping on April 7th this year, which is 2021. And it's featuring the icon of Brazilian music and tropicalia, Tom Zé. And if you don't know who Tom Zé is, you are in for a real treat. He is a magnificent performer who's had a career since the 60s. I believe he recorded his first album in 67 and it was released in 68, and he's just gone nonstop. He was such a great inspiration to all the tropicalistas like Gilberto Gil, Caetano Veloso, Gal Costa, Novos Baianos, who he actually introduced the members, the founding members, to one another, and Jorge Macalé, George Mauchner, all the real founders of Tropicalia, Os Mutantes, they all look to Tom Zé as like one of their older brothers and mentors. So it's been such an honor for both of us, Victor and I, to be able to work with Tom Zé and make something new in the canon of Tom Zé, in that it's his first time being backed with ska music. And he, you know, also he's dabbled in dub, but this is like a heavy dub treatment we did of Stepper's reggae dub version as well, of a song called Ababa, which he had recorded on his third album, 1972. This is a redo, and super stoked. So, you know, I wanted to just like get with you here, Vic, and talk some turkey, man. I mean, you know, I looked you up in Wikipedia. I don't have a Wikipedia page yet, but soon come, as they say. And what I didn't realize was you went to the Manhattan School of Music, right?
Yes, I did 6 years, got bachelor's and master's playing the bass in the orchestra.
Wow. You play upright too then?
I did.
Yeah.
I retired from the upright bass sometime in the 90s because I accepted a session and I hadn't been playing it every day. And I played so poorly in the session, and I felt, and I was like, you guys are going to fix that, right? They're like, what? It's great. I was like, no, it's not. and from that point on, I was like no longer accepting gigs because I wasn't putting in the time.
Yeah.
On the string bass.
Yeah, it is a maintenance. It's a maintenance instrument, like most all instruments, but really, you know, for the intonation, because there's no frets, and the sound that comes out of it, and the precision, especially for those of you who are unfamiliar with playing in a recording studio versus playing live. Live is way more forgiving. You know, you could have a slight discrepancy here and there in your playing, and it goes right over the audience's head because they're just caught in the whole moment of the vibe of your show. But when you're in a studio situation, it's like every note you play is under a microscope. So, you know, like they used to say back during the tape era, tape don't lie. You know, it's going to tell you the truth about, you know, how precise your playing is or not. You know, did you learn like a arco technique using the bow on the bass as well?
Yeah, I started like before, in my senior year of high school, I started taking lessons with a teacher at Manhattan School of Music's like pre-college. And she was prepping me for the audition. And I got in. I studied with this other famous cat named Homer Mensch. This guy was like the double bass player, in the 70s, 80s.
In the classical realm?
Yeah, but in the recording industry as well. And also in the teaching, he was a professor at Juilliard, Mannes, and Manhattan School of Music.
Wow.
He's the guy who played the bass in Jaws. He's the guy we
really?
hear.
He's the guy, huh?
Yeah, he's the dude.
Wow.
Homer Mensch.
Wow.
Big respect.
So
I studied I studied on the French bow with him. And then by the time I graduated, my original teacher, Linda McKnight, she was now on the faculty, and I decided to do my master's degree with my old teacher, Linda. And I told her I wanted to study the German bow. And she said, let's just get you out of school first, And then we started studying German bow after I graduated. And that was a pisser. Yeah. I much prefer it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll talk to people who have knowledge from the point of people who have knowledge out there who are watching this, and also people who don't have much reference. The bass is a giant violin, and violin has always been quoted as like the most difficult instrument to play. So now we're making a giant one, and like you have to stand up to play it, or like you could sit down. Obviously, that's a lot of classical players do that, but I mean the bow is such an integral part of the bass in being a thorough, well-rounded bassist. Even if you're never going to use your bass to play classical music, it gives you the real sound. It gives you the tools in which to be versatile in recording and playing. And the bow itself is like a separate musical instrument unto itself, because there's so much technique involved. And I recently started studying a bit. When I put my head to it, when I pick up the instrument, but actually like focused, bowing technique to get the scratchiness out of the attack, or how to attack smoothly so there's no bouncing and there's no unintentional noise. And what I've come to see is that the bow, you're going to sound pretty bad for a long time, and then all of a sudden one day you're going to just sound good. But it's not like 7 weeks from now you flip the light switch and all of a sudden you sound good. It's just like you sound less and less bad until like one day you wake up and you pick it up and you're just doing it. But it's almost a Zen thing like that. And, everybody has their own timeline and journey of how fast or slow they are in learning on an instrument, especially, but the bow, so it's such a humbling experience to use a bow. So, that's so interesting. Did you study composition?
I didn't study composition, but I had an arrangement, an orchestration class with a composition teacher.
Right.
And that was awesome. Also, I was really good with, I have like perfect pitch. So I was, I only, by the time I got to music school, there was only one level of class I had to pass. And it was like the last one, and I passed that, and the teacher was like, you've got the ears, you should check out Bela Bartok. I'm teaching a class in Bela Bartok next semester. Wow. And it'd be really cool to have your input. And then Bela Bartok blew my mind. He's why I turned to ska, because what he did with Bela Bartok, like I was really into what he was studying, because when I realized that all of his modern shit was made of folk music from his territory, like Hungary. Yeah. Hungarian, Romanian, Bulgarian, you know, like these, all of his stuff was based on very simple kernels, musical ideas, right? And I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing what he could do with some roots music, you know? And then somebody played me, the guys in the Scofflaws, they were like, we want you to join our band. I'm like, what's it sound like? They're like, well, we're not going to play you what we sound like, but we're going to play what we want to sound like. So they played me Don Drummond. And it sounded so much like this Bulgarian instrumental I had just been studying. I was like, fuck yeah, I'm in there, you know, and I already like reggae because I'm a bass player. Bass players love reggae. So I got in on like Bartok was like how I realized, oh, wow, this is an interesting beat. And then some years later on, I was frustrated with the band I was with. I didn't think they had anything, you know, we were trying to create something original. I was convinced it was impossible to create something original anymore. And I was like, let me do something original with the ska. Let me take some raw material and use that for my context, for my, you know, musical ideas. And so as a musicologist and also as a lover of reggae music, you know, it was really easy for me to find, you know, a place for my tunes without trying to invent something entire. Like my inventions are musical, but the format is not, right? It's a world music, the ska music. You'll hear this beat in Poland, Bulgaria, for different motives, you know, but you'll hear this beat all over the world.
It's true. And it's so interesting. Also, you know, Stravinsky's right up there with Bartok in, you know, taking the influence of folk melodies and orchestrating them and putting them into something that's, you know, their own voice. And that's so important. I remember looking at Bartok string quartets when I was in school, and like, it's mind boggling. To write for a string quartet is just such a set of skill unto itself, almost separate than a big orchestra. It's a whole little ball of wax that's like, it's what I call the bottomless pot of coffee. But like Beethoven string quartets are super modern sounding. They do not sound like other Beethoven pieces you might be familiar with. Bartok is like one of Charlie Parker's big influences. Stravinsky and Bartok he cited as huge influences. The bebop musicians of the 40s were deconstructing the music of Bartok and Stravinsky and taking ideas and seeing how they could apply this in their music, which is fascinating. You know, you were, when you say you were in an orchestration class, just to like be clear to people that don't know what orchestration is, it's like, it's applying, like, let's say you have seven notes in a chord that you wrote or something, for example. You could assign them to 7 different instruments or groups of instruments. So it's how do you apply it and balance the whole thing so you have a nice even balance of bass frequency, mid-range, high end. And so you have to know all the limitations and ranges of the different instruments. And so, you know, in orchestration, that's it's a whole other art aside from just composing material. And there's such an art to it. And, you know, to be a great orchestrator is, you know, a lifelong study, really, you know, so hats off to you. I mean, also, you know, people can take a look at a score where there's a line, there's a whole pad of lines. Each instrument has its own line and they're all vertical. You could look at them and reduce it down to what it would sound like on a piano. And
that's what this guy did. That's exactly what our teacher did. He would take whole scores and just play them. And like each line was in their own key.
Oh, yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Dude, I had a teacher like that too. And he could sight read a score on a piano. He could reduce the parts. He could transpose the French horn from the key of F back to the key of C, or the B flat instruments or the E flat instruments in real time. And you're like, what kind of brain can do that? I mean, of course, there's a lot of experience involved to get to that point, but like, my God, it was mind blowing. And, you know, a lot of times in orchestration, you will then detect like, well, these instruments are playing this line and so are these instruments at the same time. So after you get used to it, you see that a lot of times there's maybe 3 basic elements going on within the same time thing. So I can see now, looking back from 30 years ago, like how he could do it a little more. I can understand how that is. But you'd see the motifs of like the musical germs that the composer used, and how then they have themes and variations, and they might elongate and make it a slower passage, but it's the same phrase, or they might make it very rapid, or they might alter the phrase a little bit. So there's all these elements of it. And
give the same phrase to another instrument, and all of a sudden it's what?
You know, another one of my teachers could read a score and hear it in his head as he's turning the page in real time. And, you know, he said he couldn't always do that. You know, he said he would listen to one composition a whole lot, like for a long time, and then start looking at the score. And then he would, once he started with that, then he would go on to another composition until he got the chops to actually be able to hear it like a draftsman, like a architect could look at a blueprint and tell you what all the details and all the room layouts are. I mean, it's mind blowing. So
you see the building.
Yeah. You know, so I mean,
through the walls.
You know, this was very revealing for me to find out that you went to Manhattan Music School, because it makes sense in the quality of the music you play, because, you know, we both play music that is pop music in what it is, you know, in its genre. It's music of the people, yet it's not terribly sophisticated on par of, say, a Stravinsky, for example. You know, and so it's deceiving, because there's a lot of people that say we're in ska bands that everyone was playing by ear. No one was studied. Everyone in the band was arranging their songs by ear, or trying to copy a Skatalites arrangement or whatever, and just go for it, just through the love of doing it. So the foundation is key here, you know. And I think, well, we both pretty much started our ska journey in playing it right around the same time, because you started around 88, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I started Jump with Joey in 89. Before that, I had been in a band called Tupelo Chain Sex that was a post-punk experimental band that used elements of ska and reggae. And we were like a big influence on Fishbone, who was like a young fledgling band. We'd do shows together, but we just, what now they call mashup, we were just mashing together different styles and idioms and doing it all by ear, arranging by ear, you know. But it evolved into, you know, eventually Jump with Joey had the same drummer, Willie McNeil, in Jump with Joey was in Tupelo Chain Sex. And it's interesting because we both kind of started around the same time. And what I right at that time, I had been taking a workshop, like a 6-week workshop at the Dick Grove Music School in small group arranging. So you'd spend 6 weeks in studying how to arrange for a rhythm section and trumpet, trombone, and tenor sax. And then you would write.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so you would write an arrangement of a song, and then a band would play it for you as your final. So that was how I learned how to put together just the 3 horns with the rhythm section initially. And
yeah, I mean, orchestration and arranging, for those who don't, you know, who know one term but not the other, it's the same thing.
Yeah, basically is. So, you know, what went on there was that I I learned that most basic thing. And right around the same time, I started making charts. I spent a month making 10 songs for Jump with Joey. And I, like, a couple years before that, I started doing transcriptions of melodies from jazz songs and stuff. And I had a friend who was a trumpeter. We had a little bebop quartet together. And so he would proofread my transcriptions and tell, like, show where the discrepancy was, like in how I laid it out to be legible and these kinds of things. So that really helped. But the interesting thing about the trumpet, trombone, tenor sax combination is that that's what Mongo Santamaria had in his band, which is then what, like, influenced greatly the Skatalites' music. There's so many Mongo covers, like Fatbacks, which is Tear Up, of course, like Phoenix City, El Pussycat, like a lot of them had other names with Mongo, but they kind of modeled themselves a lot from Mongo Santamaria in that sense, right? And
Yes,
for me,
yes.
you know,
and there was definitely, and there was, certainly Skatalites had Cubans in the band. I mean, Rolando
right.
Alfonso.
Yeah,
And
Tommy McCook, right?
So,
yeah,
so
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a vital, it's elemental, fundamental part of the beat that they created.
And also with the trumpet, tenor, and trombone combination, I had been friends with Poncho Sanchez and the players in his band since about 78 or 79, before they were the Poncho Sanchez band, when they were playing with my neighbor Bobby Redfield, who was a guitarist with Cal Jader. And Poncho was in Cal Jader's band alongside Claire Fisher in the mid 70s. So but Poncho Sanchez's band had trumpet, tenor, and trombone. So you have a representative of the brass family, the trumpet, the trombone family, and the sax family, which are your basic things. Like in a big band, you would have like a whole section of trumpets, trombones, saxes. So this is like
3 of each,
a mini band, right? So it's interesting that I kind of modeled Jump with Joey after Poncho Sanchez, which modeled himself after Mongo Santamaria's band. And he plays a lot like Mongo Santamaria. I mean, he's like he's direct in the lineage of it. His vocabulary, great friends with Mongo, but it's just so interesting how all this happened. And I was writing arrangements, and this is what happened with Jump with Joey. Right around the same time, there were other little bands cropping up that were emulating traditional ska, and they were like high school age people that were doing it all by ear. And they heard Jump with Joey, and they heard the quality of the performance, and they were like, well, why is that? And it's because we actually had all the parts written out with the articulations of, so everybody in the horn section is playing with unity. Everyone in the horn section is a learned musician who has like an adult sound, like a mature sound, and can sight read. All of this stuff is kind of what, plus we were like half a generation older. We were like in our mid 20s compared to like Hepcat, who were like 18, 19 years old at the time. So that's kind of where that happened, and in kind of a byproduct of this example was that a lot of younger musicians took the cue and said, oh, I want to do that. So I'm going to go learn more about music. And a perfect example is Todd Simon. Of Todd Simon, right? Trumpeter,
totally.
Right? Producer. I mean, wonderful guy.
I know him from Antibalas.
Right. And he's played with like Macy Gray and so many bands. And
he's a genius.
He is, right? And
I would use that word with Todd Simon.
Yeah. And so,
I remember hearing his
often
Yeah, I would
said,
say,
like, I saw Jump with Joey and it made me want to up my game and learn how to do that, you know?
holy shit.
Yeah, and he brought his music teacher to my recording studio years ago when he was doing a string arrangement recording date for Spanky Wilson that Quantic was producing. And he introduced me to his teacher, and he said to his teacher, this was really hit my heart, like, Joey's the reason why I'm here today. I'm like, oh man, you know, like, why do we play music? It's to affect the lives of others, right? And so, like,
I think you and I agree that, like, I've come to this realization a few years ago, and maybe you feel the same way. Is like, when I make music, it's not for the general public first. It's for musicians that could get the jokes I'm making, or could understand the tricks I've included subtly behind what's just a simple dance beat, but there's some shit going on. And so my music, like I feel like I write it for other musicians, and I'm sure you feel the same way. Like, you know that, like, those who know will appreciate what you do.
Yeah, there's a language there, and there's like an interesting balance, because I feel like, yeah, you want to give the musicians something that keeps them coming back too. So like, you make music that's fun to play for them, and it's not such a strenuous task of like, oh my God, I gotta play all these notes really fast, and like all this stuff that's getting me like on point. Like, you get them stuff that keeps them relaxed, but it's interesting. But like, at the end of the day, we're both like folk musicians who want to connect with people in the audience and not just make cerebral music. So there's this kind of balancing act that goes on.
I agree. Like, I think we both agree that we want people to dance first.
Yeah.
And think later, you know, like,
that's true, man. And like, why do so many why is it common for jazz musicians to complain that not that many people come to their shows? It's because they're not playing music that's danceable most of the time. It's concert music, and concert music is a very niche audience of people that, it's like wine tasting. You know, like, it's very seldom that a person who doesn't know how to listen to, say, classical or jazz is going to be engaged by something like that, because they don't quite have reference points of it, you know?
You would know about this. I heard this thing, I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory or a musicological study or what, but basically the tempo of jazz is accelerated in New York during Prohibition because people weren't allowed to dance. And there are laws called cabaret laws in New York that even Giuliani resurrected after Prohibition to make money, that would, you needed a license. An establishment requires a license for people to dance because it was associated with booze.
Yeah.
So and
I have heard
was
this.
one of those, you know. So what I heard was that bebop musicians were inventing like, not that they were trying to invent a tempo that nobody could dance to, but since they were no longer sort of like obligated to make people dance, very much the contrary, they were allowed to explore the musical aspects, and the tempo could go where as fast as they were thinking.
Yeah. Jazz
and not
became,
you know, faster than people could dance. So became cerebral. I heard that jazz became cerebral during Prohibition.
You know, I don't know. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And it became concert music. It became something where people sat and listened with intention. And, you know, of course, swing music was still going on at the point through the 40s in big bands and stuff. But a lot of the big band leaders were exploring bebop concepts. You know, people like Woody Herman and Stan Kenton and Count Basie, you know, I know they were, but it's very interesting because it became a concert music, and as it kept evolving into the 50s, especially into the 60s, it really became a cerebral, a thinking person's music. And,
Yeah.
you know, it also became
I mean, it
something,
always was, but then all of a
you
sudden they
know,
couldn't dance. So then, like,
yeah,
the musicians were free to run as fast as they think, you know?
yeah. And then
And
you had,
ska has some of that. Ska has some of that
oh
because
my gosh.
I love watching, like, I remember in the 90s, my first time in California ever was playing bass for Desmond Decker. And like our first gig was in some, you know, was in with Let's Go Bowling as the opening act. And I was floored by the tempos, but I was also floored by like the kids catching up, you know, like they were all just like running in place, you know.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
This shit
Yeah. You
was
know,
frantic.
right. And like, did you play the whiskey with Desmond Decker? Do you know
Yes.
what year it
And
was?
that was the first time I heard Hepcat, and I was sorely, sorely humbled because I thought the Scofflers were the only people who took the Scatolites seriously. Then all of a sudden, oh shit, you know,
That's
Hepcat.
so
All
interesting.
right.
I was at that show.
Oh
I
shit.
was at that show. Yeah. I don't remember you. Maybe you had hair. I don't know.
Dude, at that show, I had like box braids. Like my hair had already been down my back, so I had it braided in Harlem. And I think I was wearing like a Raiders shirt or something.
Yeah, I wouldn't remember. It was a lot of joints ago. But honestly, like, is it true that the other singer on the gig was Delroy Wilson? Was he in the band?
No, no. Let
Tell
me
me
clear it
about
up.
that. There was a different singer
Delroy
alongside him, right?
Delroy Williams
Okay.
was the MC and quote unquote manager and personal controller of Desmond Decker, and he would MC. He could sing, and I don't think he did.
He sang
I
like
think he
backups. He sang harmony parts, I think. But
right, right.
I'll never forget, like I went backstage to Desmond Decker's, you know, dressing room and want to smoke a joint in there. And I was, you know, he said like, you could smoke it in here. Like I was about to build it. And he was like, but you can't build it in here. Because he was wanting to be very careful that like someone, an authority figure would walk in and there I was with the weed out or whatever, you know. So like good times. I mean, we're so fortunate to have been in the company of these people. I mean,
Yeah,
that's such
yes.
a humbling aspect of like so many people that are departed now, Rico Rodriguez, all pretty much every one of the Scatolites except Doreen Schaefer and you know, Lester Sterling. I got to play with Laurel Aitken.
Now Laurel is the guy I most connected with, and he was the one I really truly had pleasure in hanging out with. Like he was in New York, and Shay calls me, and he says, "Look, Laurel's in New York. He's got a day off. He's got nothing to do." I'm like, "Oh, let's you know." So I found him and we hung out. He saw Version City. We went for food, and you know, I did the whole nine for him, you know. And one time I played my only time in London with the Stubborn All Stars, and he hired a driver to take him down to see the show, and he bought me a pint afterwards. That's like
dude, you can't put a price on these experiences. I mean, these are guys that we were hero
same
worshiping, right? Like on their records long before like they ever, like I like to say, popped out of the vinyl into our lives. Like what? You know? Oh my
I mean,
God.
the reason we connected, we were on tour with the Ska Jazz was backing up Laurel Aitken,
Ska
right?
Jazz on New York Ska Jazz Ensemble. Yeah.
Yes, the New York Ska Jazz Ensemble, which is like, by the way, I would say that's the first time I was in the company of musicians who could read and write. You know, Scofflaws wasn't that.
Yeah.
You know, although Paul Gephardt from the Scofflaws and Buford O'Sullivan, these guys were heavy musicians and they still play on my records to this day. You know,
Yeah.
so wasn't, but I mean, Scofflaws as an idea wasn't
Yeah.
so pragmatic or whatever. So anyway, Ska Jazz, New York ska jazz ensemble.
Yeah.
We're backing up Laurel Lake and we're hanging out, and I'm talking, and I was asking, like, so Laurel, that record you did with the Scatolites the other year, you know, like, I mixed that thing, and it was a real, like, technically it was a train wreck, you know. They used some tape that was already pre-recorded and old, and it was literally falling apart on the machine, and like the session was really weird. And he's like, man, we were on tour for a month in Europe by that point, and everybody hated each other. And then at the last minute, somebody said, let's make a record. And they're like, fuck you. And they said, no, we're going to make a record. And they're like, all right. And it was just a bunch of fighting and fussing and fighting. They said it was the worst experience for everyone, musically, personally, technically, in every way. And I was there mixing it and trying to, get it all together, you know. And they're doing I'm in the mood for ska.
Yeah.
Right? I'm in the mood for love, but Laurel's version for ska. And in the bridge, the middle eight, the last 4 bars, there was like harmonic cacophony going on. And I finally soloed each instrument on the mixing desk and found out that the bass was playing, Lloyd Brevitt was playing a different last 4 bars, like in another harmony. And I was like, man, I can't, I have to make a call. Nobody's here. I'm alone in the studio doing something and nobody wants to be a part of. And I was like, I'm going to re-record these last 4 bars for both bridges with the right harmony. Because as soon as I did that, everything sounded right. Everybody else was one place and Brevitt was somewhere else.
Yeah.
I told Laurel about this in the van. And he's like, oh my God, thank you. We fight it for hours. Me and Brevitt, we fucking fought about this. I said it was this way. He said it wasn't. He wasn't going to do it, blah, blah, blah. When he found out that I fixed it, he was like, man, thank you for preserving the moment, like.
I hope Brevitt didn't find out because
he didn't care. I played on one Ball of Fire. I played bass on Ball of Fire.
Did you play upright on those?
I played his upright.
Oh,
he left his bass in the studio. He was like, I'm out of here.
Because what I wanted to just side note on this for the audience is each bass has a different sound and different tone.
Oh, yeah.
And what microphone was used, the quality, the character of each brand and make and model of mic has a different sound in its capture. So for you to just pop in 4 bars of a bass that's already recorded maybe somewhere else with a different mic, to get it to match in its sonic quality and its consistency, that's you're doing some magic there, man. Really,
It was I have a distinct way of mixing the bass, so it made it easier for me to know how. Also, something I went through in Manhattan School of Music was that I wanted to play in jazz groups, but I didn't want to play string bass. I wanted to play the Fender, the electric bass. And they said, we'll let you play it if it sounds like a string bass.
Right.
And I spent all my time trying to mimic the mechanics of the upright bass.
Yeah.
And which doesn't permit a lot of fuckery.
Yeah.
And that helped me a lot. Getting the tone, no choices. And so I was able to mimic what Brevitt was doing on which I've been doing since I joined the Scofflaws. Yeah.
Sure.
And on the electric bass, I try to get that.
Wow.
In the case of Ball of Fire, it was something else. In the case of Ball of Fire, they preferred the sound of my instrument. It just didn't sound like his. So I played his.
I see. Was it that Dobro portable bass where the neck comes off of it?
Yeah.
Wasn't it Dobro, I think?
Yeah, I don't remember the name, but it was
something
folding,
like that. Yeah.
Folding business.
And every time you take the neck off the bass to travel, when you put it back on, the strings have to stretch again, audience members. So he would constantly be retuning his bass during the show because then they were traveling to another city and playing tomorrow and reattaching the neck. And the whole thing was not a fun experience as a bassist. And did you ever
Agreed.
were you ever privy to a Scatolites rehearsal?
No.
Oh, dude, it was like mayhem because they're all having these arguments about us, how the song is supposed to go. And they're songs that they've been playing for years and that they recorded, that they're classics. And they're having these arguments, which are all like kind of battle of the egos. They just like each guy wanted to be the guy who won the argument more than like serving the actual like song. I mean,
Well, it's this, but it's also something I see about like something about this. What you're saying, I saw in my dad, which was that he always elaborated memories. He always made them like, there's a movie about that called Big Fish. It's like that. It's like the guy, and I'm trying to, and I remember, I'm old enough to remember what it really was like. I was like, no, it wasn't like that. It was, but like, so I can imagine a room full of people my dad's age trying to recreate history in the moment.
No, I mean, the mind-blowing part for me really is Roland Alfonso, because Roland Alfonso, by the time I had met him, he had already had 2 strokes. He could only use one hand and partial use of his other hand, but he was able to replicate the solos from his recordings from like 30 plus years before or whatever, 30 years before, like verbatim. Even like the more obscure songs, he was able to like had this muscle memory. And he traveled a lot, and a lot of times he couldn't remember, like he'd say like, hey, what city are we in? Or he might not remember what he
Brevitt had that too. Brevitt had that too. He relied strictly on muscle memory in the end because he wasn't hearing it. Like, I don't know if he
lost his hearing.
He played my bass at a gig, and I heard that everything was sharp. Everything was sharp. I snuck up on the stage and I lowered the end pin on the bass 1 tick. And I tuned him like then I found out I figured out where he thought it, where his hands went and put the bass there.
Well, that's the major thing. The end pin is what comes out of the bottom of the bass, everybody. And so if you don't practice with the same exact height every time, your intonation isn't going to be consistent, or the ergonomics of your playing are going to suffer. So
the muscle memory.
Yeah, the muscle memory is like, whoa. I mean, I was just blown away at Roland's mind. He couldn't tell you sometimes what he had with you an hour before for dinner, but you were on the stage and he was just like, he would play verbatim what he had recorded in Studio One in the early 60s. And then he would continue on with fresh ideas and a couple more choruses of solos. I mean, it was phenomenal, man. It was just phenomenal, and such a blessing.
You know who really had all of their creative powers right until the end was Cedric Brooks.
Yeah.
He came down to Sao Paulo with the Scatolites.
Wow.
And we had already met at the Knitting Factory in New York. We were playing on separate stages. He heard what I was doing. He liked it and he sat in. And so he liked it and sat in, and it was great to know him that way. And then when he was in Sao Paulo, we made some records.
Wow. That's amazing.
And so
Lloyd
he
Nibs
was just
as well.
creating stuff. That was an amazing session. The guy, I don't remember how old he was before he went into a coma, but he was sitting here in the studio, and I had 2 other producers here with me, and I'm playing all our tunes. And he's sitting here and he's like, I like that one. I think I got something for that. All right. Whose is that? Machado. All right. Put it in. And they, every time he liked the tune, somebody had to put $100 on the table. And then he would stand up, and Kevin Batchelor backing him up on the trumpet. It was perfect, It was Kevin that brought him to my studio.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, Kevin's an old, beautiful soul. Kevin Batchelor is an important force in the scene for people who don't know. He really is. For all of us musicians, he's an important cat, you know? And then, you know, and then he sat down, listened some more, play some more tunes. Oh, I like that. Oh, that's mine. Okay. $100 on the table. So he left the place with $600. He was so happy. And we all had like 6 tunes with Cedric Brooks on them.
That's amazing. It's amazing, amazing. I mean,
he invented shit, you know. So he was somebody who was like really, all of his facilities were there until the end.
Yeah.
This guy did not slack.
Yeah. That's like Lloyd Knibb too. I mean, drummer of Scatlites,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
He was the one who had such a sharpness in, you know, everything. He really had this grounded, focused persona. I mean, he had this thing about him where, you know, he was such a great player in, he never lost it. And he was such a good person in taking direction in a studio. He could sit and tell you stories about all of the behind the scenes things, like he remembered it all. And he also vacuumed my apartment for me once when I was house cleaning, and he was staying with me. And he said, they call me Mr. Clean. That's one of my nicknames because I'm always cleaning. Like, so one of my most proud moments in my life is like Lloyd Knibbs, he vacuumed my apartment. That's good for the resume, you know. I mean, it's an honor, but I mean, to know these guys was like really, really such an enriching experience for us to have this. And
yeah,
you know,
and Val Douglas, dude, you know Val?
He's the what does he play as the bass player? No,
He's
right?
their bass player. He's
Yeah.
been their bass player longer than people know. Like,
Really?
he's been ghosting. Like, the only reason I ghosted on Ball of Fire was because he wasn't in town.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So Val Douglas has been playing, you know, and he has that tune with Abyssinians. He's, you know, he's all the way back there.
Satamasagana? Did he play on Satamasagana? Oh, I did not know this. Because I'd never heard of Val Douglas before he was with the Scatlites after Brevet left. Wow.
Right. But he had already been on the record, so he was the perfect replacement, right?
Oh, incredible. And like, you guys you played in a bunch of bands like Skavuvi, right? No, you produced them.
No,
like
I produced their record, yeah.
Stubborn All Stars, not Pie Tasters, New York Jazz on Ska Ensemble. And so like, but then you were producing records for Moon Ska, right?
Yeah.
Pie Tasters, Ska Vuvi, Slackers, people like this.
The
like
Dusters, yeah.
For those of you who were in ska music in the 90s as fans, listeners, ska, like the Moon Ska label was prolific in what they were doing during what was called the third wave of ska. And you had like everything came together. Like you had traditional ska resurgence, you had two-tone style, special selector style ska, you had punk ska. It all was kind of mashed into like this third wave, what was called third wave. So Moon Records, how would you define Moon Records? A lot of it was kind of two-tone influence, wasn't it? And kind of combining two-tone with Scatlites, or?
Yeah, I mean, as a record label, I don't think they had as much of a focus on a certain style of the ska, like, than they did want it to grow, and it was definitely a vehicle for so many bands.
Yeah, tons of bands, right? From the East Coast, though, really, right?
Right.
It was all East Coast bands,
New York
right?
label, founded by the Toasters, Bucket, Rob Hingley, and it was a very well run vehicle, actually, and there was a lot of material out there that Bucket was able to make the connections. I think Toasters are probably the first band to tour the U.S., you know, coast to coast, you know, definitely the first band in so many cities. And that was something that Bucket really, what really drove him was playing it somewhere new. It's something that to this day, this is what he wants to do. He wants to play somewhere he hasn't played before.
That's
That's
great.
awesome.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
and every time he shows up, you know, there's already some ska band that are influenced, or maybe this is the first ska band that, you know, and it was like the Johnny Appleseed situation, right? And so it became a really great like thing for everybody. It was mutually beneficial as much for the Toasters as it was for every other band on the label, you know?
yeah.
As
Was
much as they were
Cavo
willing to
in
work.
the Toasters? Cavo? Sean Dinsmore? Was he in the Toasters?
Densmore.
Sean Dinsmore? They call him Cavo, and a guy named Lyle, or
Lionel. Yeah. All right. So you're talking about the version of the Toasters that
the
came
first version.
before, like this was like the Toasters New York knew, with these two singers. And then these two singers were what's the word? Damn, my English is starting to suck. But these two were sort of influenced away by a record label to start their own thing called Unity.
Unity 2.
Yeah.
Right?
Those are the two singers that were in the Toasters.
Right.
So then
Lionel,
Bucket's left.
Yeah. And Sean
so
Dinsmore.
That's it. And so their thing didn't work out. The Toasters, Bucket just said, you know, we got this, you know, and kept going.
Wow. Because I came to know Sean Dinsmore in Shanghai, like
What?
nearly 12 years ago. Yeah. Because Sean Dinsmore, we have all these mutual friends, and he's been living there and I think Hong Kong for a long time as an entrepreneur, opening bars, restaurants, and these things. And so I looked him up. Somehow I got connected with him. And that's the first time I met him. No, I had met him once in LA, but I mean, yeah, I had lived in Shanghai on and off for about a year in 2010 as the musical director of a cabaret club that had opened.
Awesome.
And it was like a Moulin Rouge type of club in its opulence. And I was the musical director, and it was mainly all expat performers. And yeah, it was
best gig ever.
No, it really was. And the decadence in that time.
At Casablanca.
It totally was that. And I met my partner, Amy Jo, on my birthday in Shanghai, like right before the club opened. She was the costume designer and one of the performers in the chorus line and featured performer. And you couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, it sounds like it's out of a musical or something. I mean,
of all the places in the world.
It was totally that. I mean, I had to go to China to find my American girlfriend, like the one that I actually finally settled down with after being like a serial like a monogamist. It's crazy. I mean, so, but I remember Moon Ska was very prevalent in this, like all the way through the 90s, pretty much, right? I mean, what was their run?
Yeah. I have two feelings about Third Wave. One is I really liked the amount of effort that went into it in the New York scene, you know, and the Slackers was the Pie Tasters was the first band that Bucket said, I want to invest in the band. I want to have, you know, because until the Pie Tasters, he accepted finished records.
Right, people would record their own album and hand it in.
Master them and make CDs, give it back, spread them out.
Yeah.
And then with the Pie Tasters, he was like, I want to actually record their record. You know, so he hired me as a producer. That was my first gig. It was like 93, I think, or 4. I don't remember, but because he knew that I had produced the first Scofflaws record and that I had done a lot with a little bit of money. So he was hoping that that was his, you know, incentive to have me go down to DC and record with them. Which was a crazy story. It was very difficult, but not because of them. They were great in the studio, but there was this misunderstanding with the owner of the studio who thought he was going to be the producer, and then shows up this 26-year-old, and he made everything difficult out of spite.
I see. And so that's always a drag. How long had you been an audio engineer? Had you been a recordist or a mixing engineer, or both?
This was back in the day where my only experience in the studio was as a bassist. I was getting called a lot in the 80s because back then you needed to go to a studio to record something.
Yeah.
Even if it was a sketch or a demo for the Library of Congress, or it was a song submission, like every guitarist, pianist, singer, songwriter needed drum and bass on their demo. So it was all this middle-class work in the studios that doesn't exist anymore.
Totally.
Yeah.
There's no home recording. And I remember being in one of the first time I saw Pro Tools was in 1991, and it was like a very high-tech studio. And it wasn't for years until everyone was using Pro Tools as an industry standard. We stayed with analog tape for years to come. So that was your first gig. Did you have a second engineer that set up all the microphones and the placements that knew that, or did you have to wing it?
I at that point, I had already made a record with an engineer who was a friend of mine who taught me a lot of stuff, and I observed and stuff. And so I was acting for Bucket, and for the first Scofflaws record, if I was the producer, it was in the old-fashioned way where you hire an engineer, you hire a studio.
Yeah.
And you interact between the musical goals and the technical limitations. You're the guy, the liaison between, the musicians and the engineer. You're like, the musicians want this. You have to say that to the engineer, and then the engineer, you have to represent the engineer. Say, look, we have this amount of microphones.
Right.
You're the guy who settles it, and that was my gig for years. I only started putting hands on the desk when I started working for Jeff Baker, King Django, for Stubborn Records. And it was such a more low budget roots thing that we had to do our own everything. And we learned, me and Agent J and Vic Ruggiero, we were the guys that, with Jeff, that got to use, had keys to the studio, and we could work off the clock and experiment and make our own mistakes alone, and don't waste anybody's time.
Right. So how did you learn about mixing and how to use outboard gear like compressors or effects units, or how, the technical side of it? Was someone showing you, or were you observing when you were in other sessions that were an audio mixer and asking questions? Or because mixing is a whole art unto itself. I mean,
right. I think my first questions were, I was always bugging the engineers when I was playing bass for other people.
Yeah, I wish I had done that more.
What compressor, what compressor did you use? This, and they'll show me, and I started knowing what compressors I liked for the bass, for me to sound good, and from that, it was more like, making the first Scofflaws record was kind of on me because I was the only one that had been in the studio. And it went so smoothly because I had rehearsed the band separately. I rehearsed the rhythm section for a couple of days because I knew they would record separately. And then I record just the horn sections. I rehearsed just the horn sections so they could hear themselves better.
Yeah.
And so we spent a lot of time rehearsing and not a lot of time recording. We had it before we got in there. Old school style, you don't go in there and go, let's be the Beatles and stroke our beards and think about what we could,
Yeah, sure.
We made that record in $5,000. We made that record.
Wow.
And Bucket was impressed by that. And so then by then I had learned a lot about, what microphones I like and stuff. by the time it came to make the second Scofflaws record, I wanted to make it at Lenny Kravitz's studio. I forgot the name of his producer, but he was so cool. I called him up. I knew the studio was in Hoboken. I'll remember his name. Anyway, I called him up and I was like, I want to make a record that sounds more lo-fi, something like the Scatolites already did, because the first Scofflaws record was very hi-fi, kind of shiny,
Clean. Yeah.
clean.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought the Scofflaws to Hoboken and we made a couple of songs there. And I was like, it's too clean. So I called this guy, Henry Hirsch is the name of the producer. He and Lenny Kravitz created that sound together.
Wow.
And like they were the first ones who were like, you know, they had it right in the 70s. And they're sonically, you know, they were way long before Daptone came on the scene. I mean, these two guys were really bringing back the old way to do it. And so I called Henry and he's like, what are you trying to do? So I play a Scatolites tune over the phone to him. And he's like, oh, they're using ribbon mics. Oh, they're not recording at full speed. The tape's at half speed. He knew, so then we made the record there and just my knowledge just grew and grew and grew, you know, but he could hear that over the phone.
That's what I was about to say. Like, what? I mean, that's
Maniac.
You can only chalk that up to experience, really, like an innate ear and experience. Like, wow, you know, shoot, that's really incredible. And you know,
yeah, big props to Henry Hirsch.
Yeah,
he wasn't a nice guy, but
it doesn't matter if you got it, what you needed from him. You know, like you learn.
I remember I showed up in the studio and it was time to work, but he was in the control room and I wasn't allowed to go in. But I heard that he was listening to Led Zeppelin. Just listening to, like, you know, Black Dog on his system, you know. Finally, he comes out and I'm like, damn, that sounds good. And he looks at me, he's like, Led Zeppelin sounds good anywhere. Like I'm, you know, idiot for thinking it sounds good there and not any, you know, it's like really kind of cold, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, you can be cold when you're right, I guess.
Well, of course, when you're probably older and experienced and like, dude, like if it's played well, and this is kind of comes to this part, is like, if you play music well, it doesn't really matter how many bells and whistles you have in your gear or anything. It comes through in the recording, you know, and a lot of times a person would come in and see my gear when I had a recording studio, and I had a board that had belonged to the Beastie Boys. They had made Check Your Head on it, and it was really through Mario Caldato, and you know, I had bought the
Brazilian.
Yeah, Brazilian. So like, but it wasn't an automated board, and people would come in and say like, well, I can't, you don't have like an automated board and you don't have much of rack equipment and all this stuff. I'm like, and inside my head, I was like, but how good is your music? How good can you play? I wouldn't say it, but it was
how good are you musicians?
Like, I don't have all the expensive band-aids that are required for you to actually sound good and get through to people, you know?
And this comes back to orchestration too, because orchestration is something that influences me as a mixer.
Yeah.
You know, because something about orchestration is like, are all the frequencies being taken advantage of? Are we, you know, can we double what's going on the cello in the flute just to make sure it's like everyone hears it?
Yeah.
You know, and these are mixing decisions that we make, you know? And
that's why
it has a lot to do with it.
You know,
limitations are a musician's friend, you know?
Yeah, so true. You know, one time Ben Harper's band came to make a song. There was a Rubber Soul, like 30-something anniversary album where different artists recreated songs in their own style of the Rubber Soul album. And Ben Harper came in to do Michelle. And I had only 24-track analog. And well, I did have Pro Tools, but I didn't have a way to transfer it or something. I can't remember the whole story, but basically what happened was Ben Harper said, this has actually been fun because I've had to make my executive decisions as I'm creating the song. Whereas like on a Pro Tools, you get as many tracks of one instrument as you want. And like a guy might play 10 times. And afterwards you have to decide which is the best one and all this time and stuff. Whereas no, like with analog, you're just like, no, I think this one wasn't the one. Let's do another one. And then you finally got the part done. And he said it was actually really fun to return back to those limitations. He was very pleased with the outcome of it, you know.
I bet. I love those situations because everyone has to commit. And it's like, okay, we have this amount of tape. So if you think we can do a better one, we'll burn this one. But if you think we can't, if you're not sure if we can do a better one, then we'll keep this one. And it's a decision-making time. And then by the time it's time to mix, like most of the decisions have been made and it's just glorious playing with the compressors and the EQs and, you know, but this thing about digital recording, Joey, this is totally what people need to get hip to, because like Brian Dixon, for example, he totally gets it. I heard the first Agrolites record. I was pissed because it was so good. I was pissed. It was like I was pissed like when I heard Hepcat. I was pissed. And then I talked to him. I'm like, how'd you get this? You know, like what tape did you use, or how'd you? He's like, no, we use Pro Tools. I'm like, how did you get it to sound like it was on tape? He's like, I limited the band to 8 tracks. Oh, that's awesome. He limited the band to 8 tracks in Pro Tools, and if they wanted something more, they had to take something away. And
that's awesome.
Beautiful.
That's really awesome. Like, cause like back then, like honestly, like what people were recording on 2 tracks until maybe 64 or 5, and then they had 4 tracks. Like around 65, people were starting to use 8-track machines, except the Beatles at Abbey Road, they still had 4 tracks. They made Sgt. Pepper's on 4 tracks. 4 separate tracks. I mean, at a time when people had
well, they used 2 machines. They used they would bounce. I mean, that's
okay.
Because you know,
I
they
see.
record 4 tracks of music and then they would mix it down to 1 track on another tape machine.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
3 tracks, and they just they were crazy.
Resourceful. They were resourceful, and Jeff Emmerich, the engineer for them, his book is incredible. His whole story about how he found his way into engineering and being like the T-boy at Abbey Road and to being like an assistant engineer, to being the Beatles engineer on all their real inventive albums, not past their early rocker albums, but like Rubber Soul On. Like, oh my gosh, whether you like the Beatles or not, you have to like tip your hat to the ingenuity that went into creating those albums. You know,
yes,
haters gonna hate, but like honestly, like whew, they changed.
They changed record making forever. And George Martin and Jeff Emmerich, they were the enablers. They let it happen.
Yeah.
Because before the Beatles, or at least in the early part of their career, studio session at BB, you know, you were allowed 4 hours, and that was it. And I think at some point they were like, you know, we make you guys so much money, you know, like we want to just block out the studio for a day. We're tired of these 4-hour sessions, which we take, you know, sometimes we've been on tour or something, or you know, we need ideas to finish here. And they were the first ones to change like the economy of like what LA is now is the Beatles' fault, where people just, you know, and it was worse in the 80s and 90s because there were record labels back then. But now,
that would like budget you for as long as you want, and like to just sit there for a year. It would take a year to make a record. And like, well, wait a minute, you know. A funny side note about Jeff Emmerich too is like our friend BG, he's a mutual friend of mine and Vic's. Bass
player, producer, Brazilian.
In Sao Paulo, great guy, very talented guy. He lived in LA in the early 90s. He worked for Capitol Records. That's when I met him. And he said one evening he was sitting, he was at a restaurant called, I think it was Farfalla. It was a restaurant we always went to, an Italian restaurant. And he was sitting there towards closing, and there was just like one other table left next to him. And there was a British guy sitting there talking, and like he struck up a conversation. And he like, oh, you're British? Like he could see that he was older than us. And he said like, oh, you probably saw the Beatles then, huh? And he's like, well, my name's Jeff Emmerich.
Oh shit!
I think it was Jeff Emmerich. Like, you probably saw the Beatles. Well, actually,
at home parrot in Sao Paulo.
No, in LA in the early 90s. He just happened to be sitting at a restaurant and heard this guy talking in an English accent. He started talking to him and just casually asked him, oh, so like, you know, because he could see that he was older, like, oh, you probably got to see the Beatles then. And you're like, well, actually. And then they ended up chatting for like, I don't know, a long conversation, but like, how cool is that? You know, like to be able to sit with someone like that and have them give you.
He's like, actually, I've seen George Harrison more than I ever wanted to.
That's really good. How did you end up learning how to do dub mixes as well as you do? I mean, is it just, it must be a constant evolution, obviously, but like, I mean, dude, I'm I just love what you did with this Tom Zay stuff. And also like anybody who's out there watching this, go to Victor Rice's YouTube channel and you're going to see his hands at controls making dub mixes in real time, and it's mind-blowing, and it's gorgeous music of different artists, not just his own, but like, wow, you know.
Yeah, rarely mine.
Yeah, I mean, how did you end up learning how to do this? Because it's like King Tubby's and meets like Errol Thompson and like the real people that like created. I love Glenn Brown's dub stuff so much. I mean, these are guys that inspired you, obviously, but like, how did you learn how to do this, man? I want to learn how to do that. Of course, then you'd be out of a job, but
man, there's plenty of room for all of us, man. That's something I never understood in the ska scene when there was infighting between bands. I'm like, why are you guys competing with like the only, you know how small this scene is? I mean, we should be supporting each other.
You know, I was like, I was so pleased with the mixes you made. We're like, we need to keep continuing creating music together, man. I mean, honestly. Seriously.
Yeah, I agree. I remember the first time I knew about you and your music when by a friend of my brother's. I was in San Francisco and he's like, you want to hear a real bass player? You check out Jump with Joey. I was like, all right, I'll check them out. And I was like, damn, okay, I didn't get to meet you until the Ska Jazz played with Jump with Joey with you guys at Wetlands in New York. It was like 96 or something like that. But I didn't get to hang out with you because Freddie, Rocksteady Freddie, he was sort of like, it's funny.
Was he gatekeeping you? Was he like
the first time? He was gatekeeping. And this is the first time that you've been gatekeeped from me. Like one time in New York and one time in Sao Paulo, and it's like we don't get to hang out, man. No,
But we have Zoom now.
There's always a line, dude.
Right, I know it's not fair. I mean, honestly, and like that show, I might have been playing a Hofner bass. Was I playing an upright?
Playing an upright.
I was. I don't know where.
You and Willie.
I don't know where it came from. It might have came from Carol Music. I have no idea. Or maybe they had rented me one. But
dude, it was sick, dude.
We were opening for Toots and the Maytals, right?
Yeah.
Dude, honestly, like, can we just talk there? Like Toots and the Maytals? I mean, honestly, like I had met Toots briefly in Jamaica, in Kingston in 93. And what year was this? 97? We played this gig? And like, I'd met him briefly in a recording studio in Kingston, and I met him again. I didn't meet him again till that gig, and he totally remembered me. And he loved Jump with Joey. And it was like, oh my God, like I died and gone to heaven. That like Toots just said that, like, he just gave me big ups of like, Oh my gosh, you must be doing something right when you know, when you got people like that giving you the affirmation of, you know,
Oh man, I
giving you a
live
little
for that
pat on the
stuff.
back. You
I
know.
live for that stuff. You know, when Cox and Dodd said I could play the bass, I was like, fuck. You know,
Yeah,
it went in my head, but I mean, you know, I live for that shit.
yeah. Cox and Dodd, like, let's talk about him for a minute, because like obviously you knew him, but like, how did you get to in his company? Because I knew him too, and I've got my story, but like he had Coxon's Music City in Brooklyn. I think he
Yeah.
had that record shop with a little studio behind the storefront that I didn't know about for several years. I just went there anytime I was in New York. I'd take the train and go and buy records. And I didn't know that the two ladies that always waited on me was his wife Norma and his daughter Carol. I didn't know that for years. But like, how did you get into the company of Coxon?
It was because the Scofflaws were opening for the Scatolites out in Long Island.
And he went to the show.
He finally went to one. Also, Bravo, who was selling the records, you know, and
Bravo, the record distributor, or no, Bravo,
yeah,
right?
the guy, I think I don't remember his first name, but Bravo, he was always with the Scatolites selling the vinyl.
Right.
So I met him. I met the bass player. I met Lloyd Brevet, and I think at that moment that I met them, you know, and Brevet was like, "Yeah, you play a good bass, man." I think he was just happy to see a string bass, you know, like a real upright
Right.
bass. So,
Yeah, you were playing upright in the band then, huh?
yeah. But and then Cox was like, "Yeah, man, it was nice. It was nice." Like, oh shit, okay, I better leave now before I fuck this up, you know.
Yeah.
And I'd been to the store a couple times, and finally, before making the second record for the Scofflaws, I didn't want to. We wanted Coxon to produce it, and so I went there to talk to him about that. We never reached an agreement because we didn't know how much money he wanted, and he didn't know how much money we had. And it kind of stopped right there because nobody wanted to open their hand. So, you know, but it was a very pleasant, he's like, oh, let's get some coffee, you know.
Yeah.
Didn't talk. He didn't like, and it was good because I was in a quiet phase as well. So we would just sit there drinking coffee like it's a Jim Jarmusch movie, like, you know, nothing happening, you know. And then went back to the store. He's like, let's go back to the store. I'm like, okay. Not like, these are the things he said, like, pretty much, you know. And then he goes, want to see the studio? I was like, okay. And I go back there and I see how they're making new rhythms, and they're using tape, but they're recording like with MPCs or whatever, and they're using track on track 1 and 2 is the reference, the original track, like sitting in the park, waiting for you. That they take down the faders and they have this other like a dance hall, but exact key, exact tempo.
Wow.
Like brilliant.
Yeah.
The way I got into getting to learn how to do dub by myself, I mean, I had watched so many records being made, but it was only at Stubborn Records studio, Version City, where I had the keys. It was on 3rd Street in East Village. You walk down into a hole in the sidewalk, rats in an open sewer, and just like an 8-track tape machine and a couple of reverbs, a couple of echoes, some mics. And there, you know, because nobody was there I wasn't wasting anybody else's time. Nobody was there. It was like 2 a.m. on a Wednesday in New York. And I'm like, oh, you know, let me try. And so I was able to practice there. That's where I started making dubs, doing remixes. And I still do it the same way. You know, for me, there's so many different definitions of dub. And I think it's important that we have our own. And that, not that, you know, no gatekeeping, but just like, you know, I have my definition. For me, it's a live performance by the engineer, a live musical interaction, orchestration, expression by the engineer. It's a musical event done technically. And so that's why I do the videos, and to show that it's always a real-time improvisation. That part to me is very important, that the jazz of it is very, you know,
the improv of it, because each one is a fingerprint. Like, you know, you can't, you know, each one is going to have some sort of difference in it, you know. And like, just to kind of clarify for anyone who's watching this who doesn't know what dub or dubbing is, it's like you've got all the different tracks of instruments on a multi-track recorder, whether it's digital or tape, and it's playing through the system. And you know, we typically mix and blend the balance of the whole band together. And there's each track in fader control has its own mute. So you can mute out anything. You can assign any kind of effect of like heavy reverb or echoes or things like this, distortion. So in the Jamaica, they were in the early 70s, they would make the song, mix the song, and then the side B was typically the dub version, which was a showcase for the engineer who's playing these mutes and effects on the different tracks, almost like you would a piano or a keyboard. And those are being gone, like those are going over to like a stereo 2-track recorder that's actually making the final thing you hear on the record. But it's like, whoa, you know, there's a skill. That's what you're using, right? See?
So you got like drums here in stereo. You have the bass here. I don't have nothing up 4 today. 5 and 6 are usually like the guitars. 7 and 8, we got the horns, and then 9 would be like the lead vocals, you know? And then you can just make your own arrangements along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing. And part of this came out of the fact that tape was expensive. And every time you made a new song in the recording studio in Jamaica, you had to hire a band to come in and make a new song. So what they were doing was like, oh, well, we can make side B by just kind of upcycling what we already have. And we already have, like, we made double the content, as they call it now, right? And or we could then take like, or just the instrumental track and bring in just a singer who's going to, a different singer that's going to make a whole different set of lyrics on this. And so we're recycling, we're keeping the tape, conserving the tape cost, we're conserving the band budget. All this stuff gave birth to what we then decades later turned into drum and bass music and jungle and the remix. And I also credit them with creating karaoke, because you would have an instrumental B-side on a 45 that anybody in a dance hall could sing over on a mic or chat, or, you know, they created rap. All of this, like, it's incredible. They really did create by, you know, spitting out slogans at the dances on a mic, you know. I mean, it's just incredible how inventive Jamaican people have been in music. Phenomenal, man.
It's like one of the few examples of like capitalism gone right. You know, they're like, all right, let's save some money, and we do 2 things with 1 thing, and it became a creative genre, you know. And so it is one of those times where somebody with an economic incentive created, you know, a new art form. That's true. Amazing. That's fucking crazy.
It is. And, you know, they would play the song at their dance. They were the first mobile DJs before we had people traveling to locations playing records for audiences and dances. If one of the songs they produced was a hit with the dancer, they would then, the person, like the audience loved the rhythm of it, the whole backing track, and they would take that backing track and make a new version with a different singer and a different set of lyrics. So then they could go right into the other version. They might have 10 versions of the same song backing track, so they could keep the dance rolling on that vibe for like a half an hour, right? I mean, it's
like incredible. The Joyride was just an amazing mixtape, you know. When that
Yeah.
came out, that was it was back when I had a car, you know.
Joyride.
Yeah.
I'm not hip to Joyride.
Joyride is a rhythm. It's a song
Oh, it
called
is.
Joyride.
Okay. Okay.
But
Then I
there's a
would know it.
mixtape out there from like 1990 where everybody gets a piece. I mean, they play the rhythm like 20 minutes on this cassette, and there's a different melody being sung, lyrics. You know, there's every 3 minutes someone else picks up the mic and it's
Oh man.
another tune.
Oh, I gotta hear this. I gotta look that up on YouTube.
Oh, it's there.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, like practically everything. I mean, I wanted to ask you about really, the Easy Star All Stars. I'm sure people out there watching this know Dub Side of the Moon and Radiohead. What was the name of the album that was done? The Radiohead
Radio
album?
Dread. And
Radio
then
Dread.
Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Dub Band.
Right. So like give us kind of a timeline of that era and who was involved in that, because you were the bassist on all of it, or most of it. And yeah, like give us some backstory on that, because it's phenomenal. That reached a global audience that transcended reggae. There's people that aren't really, say, Jamaican listeners per se, that's in their album collection.
Yeah.
Or their playlist, as the kids call them now.
Yeah, no, that one really crossed. It escaped genre for a lot of people. It was really cool.
And how did it gain the success? Was part of it due because everybody around the world knows and loves Dark Side of the Moon, so there's already a good reference there for people to say, "Oh, then what's this?"
Well, the way I know these guys in Easy Star was through Easy Star's like three guys, and one of them is the musical director of the label. And up until this point, they had been releasing Jamaican artists, and in the 90s, still making a living doing this, but wasn't easy. And then a pet project from within, not the music director, which is Michael Goldwasser, but within Easy Star, they had this pet project of doing Dark Side of the Moon in a reggae style. Meanwhile, there's a band, Michael Goldwasser, Goldie, he's got a band called the No Shadow Kick, and I was the substitute bass player for Noah Shackman, and that's why I knew Michael, and that's how I met Tikla. And Tikla and I have had a great musical history together ever since. We've made some rhythms together in Virgin City that, are getting redone, to this day. It's really cool.
Wow.
Legs. So I knew Tikla, I knew Michael Goldwasser. They had a Tuesday night where they hosted a party where it was just DJ, at a bar in New York, very close to where I lived. So I got to know Eric Smith as well. And then Lem Oppenheimer. Before I really knew these guys very well, they asked me to play bass on the dub side. They had hired a Jamaican, I don't know who, but apparently he hadn't checked out the record. And there are all these like progressive, like odd time signatures on a couple of tunes, like Money, know?
Mm-hmm.
And so they didn't like the result. They called me to do it because they knew I could play reggae, but they also knew that I grew up listening to Dark Side of the Moon.
Right. Sure.
So for me, it was a perfect fit. And we were done in 2 days. And that was like that was 2000, if I'm not wrong. And then I moved to Brazil in 2002. And I had gone through enough traumas in the past, from 9/11 on to just getting the hell out of the States and starting my shit here. And I had completely forgotten about the record. And then when it came out, it was like, whoa, nobody was prepared for it. Nobody, like, it saved Easy Star. Like, they had, you know, not, I guess they were, I could say that they were losing money putting out their favorite Jamaican artists, you know, and they're definitely like, in terms of like record labels, I feel like you have the one school, which would be like Moon Records, where it's like, get everybody on the catalog, get everybody on. And then you have Easy Star, where they're more like curators. Everybody has to like them. Like they don't rubber stamp the you know, like the record, you know, like
Product, you mean?
the approvals, you know, like they're
Yeah.
very picky. They're choosy mothers.
Yeah.
So so this was their idea. They just did it because they believed in it, that just because they wanted to hear it. And then it winds up saving the label and creating a whole franchise. A band was created afterwards, and that band is the band that played on Radio Dread, Sgt. Pepper, for the most part. I mean, I was for the dub side, I was just a bass player, but for Radio Dread, it was just to mix. But Goldie wasn't happy with the bass lines the way they were recorded. So I wound up replacing one, replacing another, wound up replacing all of them. So then on Sgt. Pepper, they actually said, all right, let's start with Ricey, you know, from the beginning this time. So I went to Brooklyn and played bass on the basic tracks and stuff.
Wow.
And then mixed it in Brooklyn as well, Studio G.
Uh-huh.
We mixed Radio Dread here in Sao Paulo. I convinced them to come down here. I'm like, dude, for the money you save and the price of Studio El Hosha, you know, and you know, you can. So Goldie came down, Eric came down.
Wow.
We had the thing wrapped in a couple of weeks. We were done with the record, and so Radio Dread was mixed in Sao Paulo.
That's phenomenal. I mean, just rearranging any of those albums into a reggae format where it's something that's really substantial. It's not just like, oh, well, we made reggae out of this, like just add water. No, it's not that. It's like there was so much thought had to have been put into this, because you're dealing with iconic music. It's like, to a lot of people, this is like sacred music to so many people in what it is, or it's such a one of a kind type of an album that, like, if you don't do something that comes close to it in what it is in its originality, in doing something that shows the respect but shows the your own musicality, then like it's just wasted time, you know. It's like to be able to like figure it out. This is like the thing that really impresses me. It's like, how do you figure it all out and do it?
Dude,
you know,
it was all Michael Goldwasser.
Wow.
Okay, Dub Side of the Moon was two producers, Tikla and Michael Goldwasser, and Tikla as the engineer.
Wow.
But apart from there, you know, from Radio Dread on, it's Michael making all the demos at home, and he's the one who's always led the vocal recordings. He's the one who interacts with all these artists and gets the best out of them. You know, that was, I mean, the ideas are sanctioned by Easy Star, and the demos, you know, once they all are in accord with what the idea is musically, then they just set Michael loose and
wow,
runs things, and so that's on him.
Did they win any awards? Any of these albums get any type of awards? Not that awards mean much anymore because everyone has an award, but still, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Did it get any Grammy type of nomination? Any of these, or?
I believe not. I would have known.
Yeah, you would have known. What about like any kind of?
It was like maybe not a critical success, but a box office success.
Right. What about like, yeah, okay. What about like any people from any of the bands contact you and say, like, dude, I love it, or I'm suing you, whatever? I mean,
I forgot this little detail was that, you know, Easy Star had to pass these demos across to the original musicians before getting the green light.
Of Pink Floyd musicians?
Yeah. So in that case, I think it was only Gilmour or maybe it was Nick Wright, keyboard player. Can't remember his name. That actually mentioned that it was, you know, really cool. I mean, they approved it, but he was the only one to actually mention it in a documentary or something, you know.
That he enjoyed it.
Now with the case with Radiohead, they had a problem because their Radiohead's manager had given the green light, and then like a month into production, he got in touch with Easy Star and said, "You remember how I said, you know, they approved? Well, I hadn't asked them yet, and I just asked them now, and they said no." And then Michael, I was in New York at the time. Michael's like, "Look, I need to mix two of what we have, whatever we have, 2 tracks to show them what it's going to be like. We gotta convince them." So that was the most high pressure session I had with Easy Star, was mixing 2 tracks to be approved by Radiohead, and they did. And then and then we went forward. We got the green light.
Wow, that's incredible! Really incredible.
Yeah.
I mean,
but wow. I mean, you hear Sleepy singing Airbag, you know, and it's like, of course this is gonna work, you know.
Yeah. Wow. Phenomenal work. I mean, wow. You know, these are things that will last through the ages. They will be revisited over and over, not only because everyone knows and loves the albums that they're remakes of, but because of the quality of it. And that's so important in making music, is like making music that will be continually revisited or discovered by people in the future and enjoyed and engaged with. It's not just Dixie Cup music, you know, which has its own function, but it's not really music that's revisited much. What are you up to these days, project-wise for yourself? Or I know you produce and mix lots of different people, right? As a gun for hire.
My productions have kind of ground to a halt because my creative process isn't adjusting to quarantine. You know, I'm much more creative when I'm in motion, away from the domestic thing, you know. So not being on tour for 2 years has taken its toll creatively, but a lot of work coming in from Europe and the States, especially now that the exchange rate is so brutal to the Brazilian currency. So now my price is like, you know, it's nice price.
Yeah, it's nice price for foreigners. Yeah,
I'm working on a collaboration with a band from London called the Soothsayers that do a lot of reggae, ska, and Afrobeat. There's a interesting project from well, since we worked on the Tom Zay, which was so cool for me, we got something from the Smoke and Mirrors sound system, Magabo. I've been keeping busy doing more mixing than creating these days. But at least, you know, I'm getting by. I'm very lucky to be able to have my own studio. Yeah, where I can isolate, especially in these times. You know, like I'm very lucky to be able to have fiber optics.
Right. I mean, absolutely. We're so blessed in so many ways. Of like, look at what they didn't have during the pandemic 100 years ago. They didn't have Zoom. They didn't have, like, of course, they weren't like, who knows what the experience was like as far as isolation or not seeing your friends. But, you know, like, we have so much to be blessed with right now with the technology that can connect us. And for me, I mean, I used to travel to New York with a reel of tape, 24-track tape under my arm in order to record a special guest on a Jump with Joey album, or hop over to London to record a special guest. And all I had was like the 15 minutes or the half an hour that was contained, depending upon the tape speed I used. That's all I got. And now I could send a whole like multi-track session through the internet all the way to Victor for him to mix. Well, on this Tom Zay album, not album, but the single, you know, Tom Zay recorded the voice and the guitar track in his home, sent it to me. I sent it to Oliver Charles, drummer from Ben Harper and Ocean 11. He recorded drums in his home, sent it to Roger Rivas from Agrolites. He recorded the piano and organ in his home and sent it to the other people who did the backup vocals and the trombone part, and everybody collaborated this. But like, we've been doing this for a long time. This is like actually like home recording, and recording collaborations through the internet is something that we've been used to before the pandemic. So it's kind of like, well, we've been blessed with being ahead of the curve in the fact that like there's a lot of musicians since the pandemic hit that have had to learn how to operate, buy the gear and learn how to operate recording gear. And they never had an engineering background per se, so that they could play from home and get paid to, do the recording sessions. Oh, and we have PayPal or whatever. Like, the whole thing is like,
Right.
We don't have to be in a big city anymore where the best musicians live to make real-time live recordings, which is fun as hell, but it's not a requirement anymore. And so, tell this audience a little bit about your Tom Zay experience for a minute, because what's your perspective of like having been able to do this?
Well, I knew who he was mainly because to be clear, I didn't move to Brazil for musical reasons, because it wasn't because I knew so much about Brazilian music, like I came here because I wanted to find a better New York, and that's why I live in Sao Paulo. I don't really know Brazil that well, except for when I go on tour and stuff. So anyway, my musical knowledge of Brazilian music was limited to conservatories. It was like Jobim, it's like,
yeah.
So I get here and people are giving me stacks of records. They're like, you gotta know this guy, you gotta know her, you gotta know him, you gotta go blah, 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 blah. So I heard Tom Zay. I liked it. I thought it was interesting, but I was really into this other guy, Martinho da Vila.
Oh yeah,
which is like a whole other thing,
He's a samba singer, prolific samba singer, and his daughter Martinaya is another very famous samba singer in Rio these days. Really,
I was into that. I was into choro.
Yeah. I love the choro too. It's very like first cousin of reggae, isn't it? Like, it's right in there.
It approaches Baroque music for me, the way they get into it. I mean, it's
totally.
so perfectly thought out and
gorgeous. Right? It made me fall in love with music all over again when I discovered choro. Like, honestly, and it was like their Brazilian's version of ragtime music, influenced by Chopin and the rondo form that has 3 different sections, not just an A and B section, but it's got a C area, and it's played with a lot of string instruments. And also kind of almost Brazilian's bluegrass as well. When you look at it, because bluegrass, like modern bluegrass, like David Grisman and people, they incorporate the influence of Django Reinhardt and more sophisticated harmonies and melodic stuff. So like when you look at it, it's almost like bluegrass with Afro-Brazilian percussion in it, or like, it's just like,
wow, well said. It really is.
Right?
I mean, its most sophisticated level, right? Because
totally,
it's saying what people are like. Oh yeah, we like to listen to this when we're, having lunch and stuff. And I'm like, this is like, Bartok would be very happy to know that.
Oh yeah,
people were checking this out on the casual,
Yeah, and like honestly, it takes technical mastery to play choro music, and there's a depth of repertoire like jazz, where a person who it's a lifestyle. It's what you play. It's like gypsy jazz music. I mean, that's what you play. That's all you play. There's very few people that all are masters of choro that also go into lots of other realms. There are, but a chorista is like,
it's a niche.
it's something there's no faking it. You don't just learn a few songs of it and start a band in your garage, right? There's just like, it ain't like ska. It's not as simple.
But then that's like to mention ska, it's like Tom Zay was somebody I kind of glossed over, you know?
Yeah.
And who was like, yo, pay attention, you got to go back and listen to Tom Zay. That was Vic Ruggiero from the Slackers who said that.
Really?
He's like, Tom Zay is the shit. Go back. And I know that, like, then I understood that his lyrics, he's not just a musician, he's a composer, he's a poet. He writes books. He's a writer. He's very much so much of the charm of what he does is in the words, you know, and in the lyrics, and the music expresses the lyrics, and it's not the other way around, where, you know,
it's like he's written a movie soundtrack to the dialogue that he wrote first, and now let us put the soundscape behind it, right? And like,
yeah, it's more of a Dylan thing. I mean, to put it, you know, very,
to boil it down, and like,
lightly.
He's classically trained cellist and composition, and the way he's able to manipulate rhythms and superimpose different time signatures, it's almost like MC Escher paintings or something. It approaches that kind of thing, right?
Yes.
Like interlocking animals, like in sound. I mean, and he typically only creates his own music. So this was an honor for me to like have him say like, well, show me what this ska music is first. And like, oh, okay. Yeah, if you want to do this with your musicians, yeah, I'll record the thing, and yeah, you put the backing track to it. Like,
awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
another point for ska music, because I mean, it's a world sound, it's a world beat. You know?
It is, right? And I feel that, you know, there are people that know who we are, who are strong followers of what we are, you know, globally. And there are people that know who Tom Zay are. And certain people know who both of us are. And that's going to be the real special treat for that particular margin of people that know what both of them are going to go like, what just happened here? And this is not to toot my own horn, honestly. This is like really something I feel like we've done something really special, and with someone who's such a special individual in music that, like, I mean,
oh man, it's an important connection that wouldn't have been made had you not had the, you know, it's not that many people who understand music as well as you do, man. So
thank you.
You saw it. You saw that it would work, you know.
I saw that it would work. Yeah, I saw that it would work. And it's interesting, we made a remake of this song called Ababa, and I had actually found the single of this in Rio. It was the first time I heard Tom Zay. I'd heard of him for years, but I just somehow I never got around to it. No one ever showed it to me. I don't know. And I found this single and I got it to my friend's house, and I was like, oh, this is what I've been sleeping on all this time. And it was the song Ababa, and I was like, well, this sounds like it could be a ska. You know, that's where the seed was planted. And then I went back to the record shop where I had found this that carried new and used records. And I got like 4 or 5 reissue LPs of Tom Zay. And I was like, okay, I'm sold. And, you know, through my association with Novos Baianos and their friendship in the past 4 years when they came and reunited, that's how I wrote an article about them for Wax Poetics. And through someone, I got put in touch with Tom Zay, and through email, and he answered questions for me about the formation of Novos Baianos, which is one of the most important bands of the 70s and of Brazil's history of music, basically. He put the 2 songwriters together in 1967, and they went off and created Novos Baianos. So he answered these questions. We kept in touch here and there through email, and then I just kind of popped the question of like, hey, would you be open to doing a remake of Ababa with me? And like, that's how it happened. And like, that's the magic of the internet. Oh, and the magic of Facebook, because his musical director, Danielle Maya, I found him on Facebook and we became friends and we were chatting, and that's how I got the email for Tom Zay. So like, people can
Danielle Maya.
right. I mean, people can poo-poo Facebook as much as they want, but I've made some really great connections with people through it. And like, that's just one example. Like, if you know what you're doing, you could really like have a good time, a good experience, as long as you stay away from all the other jazz that's been happening.
Yeah, it's all about the filtering, man.
Yeah.
Got to be vigilant.
Yeah. So the mix for you was pretty straight ahead, right? In making this?
Yeah, I have my tried and tested method of,
Yeah.
how I go about it, and I don't try to invent something new from a technical standpoint. I know that if I did the same thing technically with every song that comes into the studio, it's up to the music to just by sheer every song is different because every song is different, not because of what I do. So I don't feel this pressure to create new sounds or new perspectives, and I just the music, I allow the music to speak for itself, which in your case, in the case of Ababa, and for those who don't know, Ababa is Portuguese for the nanny, the nanny, the baba, nanny. There we go.
Yeah.
So, but in the case of what you produced, the playing was just so massive. I mean, it was like, I didn't have to, sometimes I have to concern myself with musical issues. Maybe there's a point where the guitar played major and then the piano played minor, and I have to decide, what works. And,
the house cleaning. Clean
sure,
up.
Musical, it's part of my process. I try and make sure that everything is tuned and timed and everyone's talking about the same thing musically. And then the mix is just easier after that, where in the case where with your productions, it's just, all right, this thing is just get it on the mixing desk now, because everything's where it's supposed to be and it sounds great. Takes less work. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, that's what I've been taught too, is like how to lay it out on tape or on the recorder to where like it's going to be almost 100% ready to mix. It'll practically mix itself if all of the orchestration is in place correctly. And it will be very obvious to the mixing engineer how to place it. So, this is out on April 7th, 2021 on a label. It's digital first. There's two versions. As I said, there's a ska version and a really heavy steppers dub version coming out on avocadio.com. It's AVOCAUDIO, avocadio.com. And if you want vinyl of this, I'm going to impress a 45 once I've gathered 1,000 people who say, yes, I want it. So go to this wait list. Okay. It's Joey Altruda Biz, spelled BIZ.com/Tom. All right. JoeyAltrudaBiz.com/Tom. And you could add yourself to the wait list there, and you'll be notified as time goes on and I get 1,000 people or more. Then we're going to press a batch of limited edition of this. And that's when the real magic is going to happen. I really do have a vision of making more music with other, hopefully more with Tom Zay, but hopefully also like with the Tropicalia artists that were part of that. So I better jump here because it said my internet connection is unstable. Hang out here for a minute with me, Victor. I'm going to stop the recording, but thank you everybody who's watched this, because we're closing in on 2 solid hours. So anyone who's watched it to this point, like, you know, you're a musician. Any parting words, Victor?
Just, thanks for thinking of me on this project, and thanks
Absolutely.
for like so many interesting subjects, things I enjoy talking about. It's been a pleasure.
It's been great. I
And
hope people watch
you know,
this.
we should do more. I know you need to do this more, because there isn't anybody else on the planet who could create this fusion, create this because that knows both sides so deeply that you know where they will meet.
How to
So
put it together.
don't
Thanks.
stop, brother.
No,
Don't
I've
stop.
got a vision. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Ciao for now. See you on the flip side.